More than 5.5 decades ago, Ontario Premier John Robarts thought kids who didn't have cottages or couldn't afford to go to summer camp should still have a place to go for some summer fun. And so the government built Ontario Place on the waterfront of the provincial capital. It was hugely popular. But as the years went by, Ontario Place fell into disrepair. You no doubt know that the Ford government has a plan to bring it back, and we'll debate that plan tonight with former Member of Parliament Adam Vaughan, who's been retained by the Therme Group to make the case for its plan, and Ann Elisabeth Samson, co-chair of a community group called Ontario Place for All, which opposes the Therme plan. And it's good of both of you to join us here at TVO tonight. Okay, let me just get a brief answer from both of you off the top, and then we'll go deeper as we go along. Adam, essentially, what do you like about the Therme plan?
Well, lots to like about it. First and foremost, Ontario Place is coming back online, all of it, not just the West Island where our facility will be placed. There's 56 acres of new parkland across the space, 16 acres on our particular island, including rooftop parks. But I think what I really like about it is Therme. Therme builds really phenomenal facilities that are accessible, they're inexpensive. There are premium services if you want them, but when Ontario Place closed, it charged about $32 to get in, extra if you wanted to go to the water park. That's roughly the price you'll pay to get to Therme, but more importantly, some of the biggest concerns I had was whether or not the waterfront parks would be lost behind an admission gate the way it was when it was originally opened. And one of the first things to come down were the admission gates, and so people trying to get to the water's edge, going for a swim or a stroll or walking a dog or kayaking, will have access to 56 acres of new parkland, over 4,000 trees, all on the water's edge, with more places to swim and facilities and maintain trails. It's a great project and a good way to move forward on Ontario Place.
Okay. Ann Elisabeth, what don't you like about the sound of that?
Quite a few things. First of all, I think that there are a number of things Adam has just said that I would disagree with. But in general, I don't like the cost of this project is enormous, and I'm not just talking about the billions of dollars the Auditor General has said that our tax dollars will go towards the project, but it's incredibly expensive. It's expensive in that the project has been shepherded through by our Ontario government to the point where they've passed their very own law to eliminate all scrutiny and accountability around the project. There are a number of unknown costs that we haven't even heard about. And thanks to this protection by the government, there's very little we actually know is being built. So there's the issue of it's expensive, it's dollars expensive. I think many folks across Ontario, even if they never visit, they're paying for it. The other thing is that I find it incredibly short-sighted. I've looked at waterfronts in great cities around the world. They tend to be open access, really visionary, and really planned, co-created with community, which this one is not, and also iconic. I think you were talking about the original vision for Ontario Place, and I think that one of the really exciting things about it back then is that it was built for Ontarians by Ontarians with this Ontario kind of heritage idea of what did it mean to be Ontarian. This project is, it's a kind of a cookie cutter attraction that's being plopped down on Ontario Place, and as far as I understand, the company hopes to build them across North America.
Okay, let's hold there. Adam, you've heard some of the criticisms. Go on back.
Well, I mean, I think that the notion of co-creation is important. It's one of the reasons we have a strong partnership with the Mississaugas of the Credit. The Indigenous footprint at Ontario Place was never pronounced, even by Bill Davis and the original architects. That's changing, and it's going to be revealed shortly as just how deep that partnership is, and it's a good thing. It's one of the things Ontario Place for All has called for, and we've built that partnership. I think the other side of it is that one of the more important things that Ontario Place has become since it was closed down is a park. The success of Trillium Park shows us that free access to the waterfront is a value that needs to be sustained. That's happening. It's with a massive new park down there, the size of Trinity Bellwoods.
Free access to the waterfront.
Yeah, I mean, they're replacing the gates, which have been open for years since the closing of Ontario Place, with an admission building that you'll have to walk around to get across.
That's actually not true. It's
well,
the access.
I would love to see the actual plans that are coming forward.
But
That's
even
one
the
of
last
the
iteration of of the plan showed that there was access to the lake, and the protected access that the community has called for. We've responded, and we've actually shrunk the size of the building and grown the size of the green space. But what's more important is that you won't have to pay an admission price like you used to have to get down to see the water, the sunset over the lake, or to go for a swim.
Is that a victory for your side?
It's really hard to take. I mean, I think the other thing Adam just said is the size of Trinity Bellwoods, and this one is really one that's been fascinating to me. Trinity Bellwoods is 36 acres.
Yep.
Currently, the plan that I've last seen is 16 acres of
on
public
the
space on the West Island.
Right.
That's right. If you want to put Trinity Bellwoods on the West Island, I would be thrilled.
It's when you quote the price of the Auditor General's report cites, it's for the redevelopment of all of Ontario Place. And while I'm not here to explain the provincial government's plan for the rest of it, but there's the Budweiser Theatre is being expanded to a year-round facility. That project, which the NDP opened in the 90s, is being built upon. The elimination of parking lots. There are 5 parking lots. Those parking lots are disappearing. 56 acres of new open green space, a public park, will be built at the water's edge, free and accessible.
Can we just pick up on the parking lots? The original plan was to do an underwater parking lot at a cost of several hundred millions of dollars to be paid for by the people of Ontario. What is the status of that?
The city and the province are working on it. There are about 3,700 parking spots, surface parking lots in the vicinity of Ontario Place's bridges. Those are being consolidated, and I'll let the province and the city explain how they're going to be consolidated. The key here, though, is that those are 5 surface parking lots, which is one of the worst urban conditions you can create in a city, especially next to the water's edge. The runoff alone is detrimental to the environment. As they get consolidated and turned into green space, they have to reconfigure how the parking is going to work down there, because it's not just Ontario Place, it's also for the CNE and for the BMO Field. And so how that gets reconfigured is important. But what's really one last point on that is that while the province and the city are deciding how to finance and build it, the revenue does not come to Therme or any other tenants at Ontario Place. The revenue comes right back to taxpayers. And so it's a business model that they're working out, a shared facility between the CNE and
Okay,
and
let me
Ontario
follow
Place.
up on something you said earlier, which is you saw the original vision of Ontario Place as being sort of made in Ontario by Ontarians for Ontarians. Do you have a problem with the fact that Therme is an international company and that's somehow inconsistent with Ontario?
I think it's a shame. I think not that it's a foreign company, but that we haven't really been truly consulted as Ontarians to the project. There's been very little public consultation. That which has been done has been very limited to what the people are allowed to comment on. So, for example, I attended 2 in-person consultations that the city put on. And then I've also attended the consultations with the province, and we were never allowed to comment on the Therme project or the West Island. So I believe that a truly visionary society, we're a waterfront city. We should be building something that is going to last into the future and truly be iconic for our.
You described our project beautifully.
But you're plopping what you've built in Romania on the shore of Lake Ontario.
Not at all. In fact, we've hired Diamond Schmidt Architects and TLA Studios in Toronto.
Yes, I'm familiar.
And we're working with a number of designers and advocates and
put
people.
a glass box and you cut down 800 indigenous trees to put palm trees
deal with
in a
one
glass
at a time.
box.
But in terms of the design is
not
unique.
Ontarian.
The design is unique to the site and unique and builds on the heritage that's there. The Sinosphere and the pods are staying, and it creates a new Ontario Place. That's happening.
You know what? Rather than have you guys describe it, why don't we take a look at some of it?
Sure.
Here's some of Therme's video of what they anticipate going forward. Sheldon, roll it if you would.
The building has emerged as a public space, a roof space which is green, which is planted, which is an active, accessible, 24/7 public park space on the roof that is woven through with a campus that really create this fulsome integration of architecture and landscape. That's accompanied by a new, very large public beach the size of Sunnyside Beach, one of the largest new beaches on the whole of the waterfront.
What don't you like about what you see there?
I just find it very funny to see the renderings. It reminds me of Wonder Woman's airplane. the building, you can't actually see it in the renderings because it's clear. And it's hard for me to imagine that once it's built, it will be clear.
Well, good news. We've been listening, and we've heard some of the concerns, and the size of the building is being edited and fit into the new landscape. And you'll see the way we've responded to some of the concerns that have been raised. And the good news is the park space is growing and continues to grow, and the places to swim are more numerous. And the maintenance of the paths and the change facilities and the shower facilities, which are 100% public and free to anybody in the city to use, all of that will be detailed as we move towards more detailed design. We're listening, and we
would love to see what you're doing. I think part of the problem is that a lot of it is in secret. It was.
But on the one hand, you've got these very firm objections, and on the other hand, you say you haven't seen it. So which is it?
I'm going from what I saw in the development application, and you are talking about evolution since that plan that I've seen. I also know that the province of Ontario, through the MZO and the Rebuilding Ontario Place Act, has eliminated the need, and in this upcoming Bill 5, further eliminating the need for anyone to consult with the public or get feedback from the public on this project.
But we're still listening and talking.
Well, I've never spoken to anyone. You were the first person from Therme that I've ever met or spoken to, and our group.
Listen,
I represent a huge number of
if you talk to
people.
Cindy
It's
Wilkie,
a deeply unpopular project.
Talk to Cindy Wilkie and Ken Greenberg, and you'll know that the day we got.
They are who?
Ken Greenberg is a noted urban planner, an activist in the downtown core. Cindy Wilkie was one of the founders of Friends of the Dawn, who was part of Waterfront for All, and part of Ontario Place for All as well. And when the project was initially awarded through a bid process to Therme against 30 other competitors, we sent a letter and said, let's sit down and let's work together on this. And we were told, in no uncertain circumstances, we don't care. It's Doug Ford's project. We don't like Doug Ford. We're not talking to you. And I think that's sad. Because one of the things Ken taught me as a young politician was to sit down with people and have conversations instead of arguments.
You're not a big Ford or Doug fan either. Doug Ford either,
but I'm working with Therme because I think the opportunity to build 56 acres of parkland on the waterfront, new beach to swim at, new health year-round facilities, which were present at Ontario Place when it closed, like the water park. You can still see the old tower there. Making that a year-round facility, I think, has got real value for the downtown.
You have to acknowledge Ontario Place kind of was a summer thing, and during the winter months, there wasn't a lot of anything going on down there. This will change that,
You weren't allowed on the site during the winter, let alone walking around swimming.
Is that a fact?
Well, I am a swimmer and a rower. I spend a lot of time on and around the water down there. And so I use it in many inclement times. In fact, when I look at the renderings, what I wonder about is those paths on top of the building and whether or not they'll be open in the winter.
Yes, they will.
And we are being asked to trust a company that we don't know much about.
Well, get to know us.
We are being
Why
asked.
start with mistrust?
We are being asked to believe that this company will be able to manage what is essentially, they would like to claim, is public space for a 95-year lease. Now, I would like to think, if you ask me what's going to last 95 years, I think the City of Toronto will be around in 95 years. I think the Province of Ontario will be around in 95 years. Do I think that Therme, the spa company that has not built anything like this in North America, will be around in 95 years? It's very difficult for me to believe.
I'm not going to cure you of your cynicism, but I mean, 95-year leases are normal for waterfront development projects. The Island Homes live on a 95-year lease. It's the way in which you need to structure a lease agreement to take it to the bank to get construction financing. Mm-hmm. There's nothing more different about that. There are terms in the contract of what happens if Therme doesn't last, and we're entirely responsible for returning the site to a natural state. All that's spelled out in the lease. But the issue is this. The issue that's really important is that the investment that's coming down there is going to transform Ontario Place into a place that everyone in Ontario can use year-round. And all the things that you spoke of, the rowing, the swimming, the walking, the dog walking, all of that is part of the plan and part of the vision for the new Ontario Place. So it doesn't ignore your concerns. In fact, it addresses your concerns. And what I'm hearing from you is what you'd rather have is more detail. And we're prepared to sit down and share those details with you and have a conversation. What we're not accepting of is this sort of constant push against us that somehow what we're doing down there is not what Ontario Place was designed to do. It was entirely designed to do this. The one difference is now it's going to be year-round.
It's a deeply unpopular project.
Amongst people who don't like it, yes, but if you talk to the wider province, we actually have a great deal of support.
When you respond with that the problem is that we don't understand, like we have spent quite a lot of time paying very close attention to any public information that is available to us.
Well, then let's take a look at some of of the assertions you make.
You are saying 56 acres, you say we, you mean Therme?
Therme is
going to
responsible for
put
16
Trinity
acres.
Bellwoods on the waterfront.
No, but
you are putting Trinity Bellwoods
this is
with
the game.
BMO Field smack in the middle on the
No, that's
waterfront
not
with
the
a
size.
path around the outside
But those are all
edge.
falsehoods.
That is
None of that's
that
true.
is a misleading narrative.
No, because none of it's true and none of what we've said. You ascribe the cost of the whole project all to Therme. That's what all of your language
I'm
on your
following the Auditor General's report,
Auditor
which
General doesn't
outlines,
say that.
but it does outline the hundreds of millions of dollars
it
that
doesn't.
are going toward the project.
List one.
The site preparation.
The site preparation was the foundation for all 30 bids.
The additional,
province came to all 30
28 million
proponents.
of shoreline service.
But the shoreline services is to fortify the artificial islands which were dumped into Lake Ontario 50 years ago, which have badly eroded and caused flooding, and to create integrity around the entire site, the East Island, the West Island, the pods in particular. In order to protect that, you've got to refortify the shorelines because the storms in the lake have intensified through climate change. Redoing that has to happen with or without Therme. Otherwise, you end up like the beach you swim at, where you end up with rebar and signposts and construction waste eroding into the lake.
Let me try
that's
something
a
here.
problem. And it has to be addressed, but it's not our address.
Okay. Is there anything he can say that would make you change or reconsider your current position?
I mean, I don't know if that's what I'm being asked here. I feel a little bit like I'm, being asked to debate these details. The other thing I want to...
No, that's important because I want to ask Adam the same question, which is to say, if you heard something here that was, in your view, legitimate criticism of what you plan to do right now, would Therme consider making changes to the plan?
We are making changes. We're attempting to have conversations. One of the reasons that we want to be out here talking with people that are concerned. When people talk, for example, the combined sewer outflow, which is for almost 80 years now been sitting on the break wall, it's fractured underneath the rowing channel. It's been leaking into the lake for the better part of 80 years. When we talk about moving that and addressing that situation, we want the best outcome for the lake possible. We want people swimming at the public beaches as much as they want people swimming at the public beaches. What we don't want is a combined sewer outflow perched on the break wall, leaking into the lake forevermore. So that has to be addressed, and we're prepared to sit down and figure out the best way to address it.
You know, Ann Elisabeth, that successive governments of all party stripes have taken a look at Ontario Place and not really done good by Ontario Place.
That's true.
So if a private company thinks it can do a better job, why not let them?
I think that I believe in much grander ambitions for our waterfront, and I find this concept extremely kind of out of date before it's even built.
Let me put that to Adam then. The notion of a privately run and owned spa on public lands in the waterfront. Is there anything inconsistent with the way Toronto does business?
That's the way the entire waterfront has been brought to life in this city for the better part of the last century. I mean, Centerville on the Toronto Island is a private enterprise working in a public park, as are the yacht clubs. It's not uncommon to see, especially in large green spaces along the water's edge, activation to occur that is both public and private in nature. The key is striking the right balance, giving people an opportunity to get a coffee or jump into the water or go to a facility in the middle of the winter and have a wonderful experience. That balance of public and private interest, that dynamic of co-developing parks along the water's edge, I've been doing that for 40 years in this city, and I think it's a great way to build Toronto.
Is that persuasive?
It feels a little insincere at this point, to be honest, because there has been a huge amount of energy and community energy. Our movement has 60,000 supporters across Ontario who are interested in this project, and it feels that energy is being dismissed instead of embraced.
It's entirely
and
embraced.
So, but the province literally passed a law.
You ask for more
but how
park,
do
you
we
get
know?
more park.
How do we know?
Well, have a conversation with us. Meet with us. Just
Well,
because
they're
there's no
meeting with you right now.
I'm meeting with you here.
Just because there's no statutory meeting to be held doesn't mean you can't come in and say, "Can you show us the details?"
Sure. I guess I believe in transparent governance,
Well,
and I
how
believe
much more transparent do you
let's
want me to
let the
be?
sunlight in. I would like to see the entire lease. I would like to know exactly
But the
what's
lease is
happening
being
with the
released.
parking
The
negotiations.
lease is being put out in the public
There was
record.
a lot missing in the release.
Look, at the end of the day, the question is, what kind of waterfront are we going to have, and how are we going to get there? Restoring Ontario Place has a price tag. Whether Therme is involved or not, restoring the pods in the Sinisphere has a price tag. Restoring the bridges has a price tag. What we're doing is partnering with the public sector to deliver resources to help facilitate the restoration of those iconic parts of Ontario Place that we all love,
Those
while
are
adding to
separate.
it and building on things like the success of Trillium Park, money which I helped secure when I was up in Ottawa, and dealing with it in a way that's consistent with the vision for the waterfront,
ask you
which is a
about that?
clean, green waterfront for all.
I hear you. Adam, let me ask you the question that I know you've received a number of times, but you haven't been asked it here, so I'm going to pile on. I've heard so many people say the Adam Vaughan that I knew when he was in public life, when he was an elected politician, never would have been associated with something like this.
It's not true.
Not true, eh?
They came to see me before I left office when they were first putting a bid in under the Wynne government, when they were shortlisted with their project. It was much bigger then and much different then. It's changed. And I was fascinated by how this company manages and talks and thinks about water, and thought it was a great fit for the waterfront, because finally you have somebody who's heavily involved in geothermal in Europe, is massively involved in reforestation projects and managing how water impacts all of our lives. And I thought, this is a good fit for the waterfront. Let's see how the project evolves. But the notion that the waterfront would only ever be green parks, it just isn't true. I mean, the Harbourfront Centre is there. We have massive new parks coming in the East Portlands, another project which I helped facilitate. We have Tommy Thompson Park. We have the parks. We're cleaning the water, not just for our beaches, but for all the beaches inside the breakwall. There are so many benefits that this project brings to the conversation that it shouldn't be an argument. And when we start talking about the cost of restoring Ontario Place, we're either going to let it fall into the water. I mean, one of the biggest costs right now is restoring the foundations of the pods. They've ascribed that as a subsidy to our company. I can assure you, we're not getting paid.
That's a separate project. That's not.
That's
we don't
part
usually.
of the. That's
we don't usually
entirely
include that one.
part of the Attorney General's $2.2 billion, which you often quote as $2.3 billion, but it's $2.2 billion. And when
Well,
you
we
go
do have
through
the
the
tariffs
list,
to contend
it
with.
is not a subsidy to our company. What it is, it's a subsidy to Ontario Place to bring it back online. Restoring the Sinisphere, we agree with you, it should be. Restoring the pods, we agree with you, it should be. Animating the pods, we agree with you, it should be. But those aren't subsidies to us. That would happen with or without Therme. Refortifying the shoreline, getting rid of the surface parking lots, adding new park space, adding new swim platforms, putting in real paths that are maintained throughout the winter. All of these are part of the cost. Some of which, about $2 billion, we bear, and there's about $2 billion the public bears. But it's also Live Nation, and it's also the new Science Center.
Ann
But
Elisabeth,
we don't get the subsidy. They share in the
Equal
cost.
time
They
for
share
her,
in the
Adam.
benefits.
Come on, equal time for her. Go ahead.
Goodness, so much to respond to. We're following what the Auditor General found on the cost of the project, and you are right. Some of it is
Not our
definitely
project,
not
Ontario Place.
Yes,
Right.
yes.
So it's not all ours.
It is not. You
That's
do not.
important.
You do not take all responsibility for that.
No.
That is for the province
You
of
should
Ontario.
edit your website then.
Okay. Goodness.
Well,
We're
you
a
keep-
group of volunteers.
keep-
we're not paid.
keep-
I'm not paid to be here.
well, you keep calling,
Right?
but you,
We are a
you
group of
keep telling
volunteers
us
doing
we're
our
receiving
very
a $2.2 billion.
best.
That's the
We're
first
doing
time
our-
I've heard Ontario Place fall
We are doing
back
our-
off of that.
we
and I'm
are doing
glad.
our very
Now let's
best.
get to the rest of the list.
However, there are so many unknown costs that have yet to be determined for this project.
For example?
For example, we don't know the last mile solution that the government has promised to get people from the new subway to the door of the spa project.
Right.
We don't know the ultimate cost of the CSO, right?
What's CSO?
That's
Combined
the
sewer.
sewage.
The city sewer
the
that's
sewer.
currently leaking.
We don't know the cost to the traffic and the difficulty of moving around during the construction phase. We don't know so many things about this project.
So let's look
and
at
the
the Auditor-
government
look at the Auditor
has
General's
done
report.
their very best to keep us from knowing anything. If this project is so wonderful, if it is as great
Ask
as you
them.
say,
I'll-
I would love to be
I can explain Therme.
completely shared.
But
I
ask
would love
them.
all. I would love
But the
all of
last
the
mile.
information.
But here's another one where they ascribe the cost of the last mile as a subsidy to Therme. The cost of the last mile is a strip that gets you from the GO station, the terminus of the Ontario line. It gets you down to the waterfront in a way that doesn't have you crossing the surface parking lots and the buildings that are closed.
Which can be a half an hour walk.
It can be a long walk. And so that project, which is currently, I think here in the Auditor's General Report forecast, I think it was at $60 million, but it's a park that the city is building on the exhibition grounds in a way that doesn't interfere with the Midway. They've told us that's a subsidy to our bottom line. It's not. It's a project which the city has been trying for 25 years to build. The fact that Ontario Place is coming back online has become the catalyst to get long-standing projects like fixing the combined sewer, like getting the last mile to the waterfront fixed. That's the way it's happening. Now, you can argue that the province has done what they've done and is doing what they're doing.
Yes,
but,
they are.
But you keep blaming us for that, and we're not the province.
No.
I work for a company that's building a facility on the West Island that's going to be delivering the 16-acre park and paying for it. It costs about $200 million. And then for the next 95 years, pay to maintain that so that the public has a park to go to that isn't abandoned or a ruin. That's a good deal for taxpayers, but it's a good project for the waterfront.
Sorry.
No,
I find it very funny that you think that I'm here to fight the spa company. You know,
Well,
I'm representing a large group of activists, community members who care deeply about the waterfront.
Your concern is
As to
My
beyond the spa.
concern is
So do
beyond
I.
the spa. The
Good.
province in the dead of
Well,
night.
I can leave now and you
the
can bring in
province
somebody
in
from the
dead of
province.
night cut down 800 mature trees. Now, you and I both know that if you live in the city of Toronto and you want to cut down a tree, you are not allowed to do that.
So let's take a
So
look
let me-
at
can I-
so the report they
Hang on
quote.
a sec. Let's get focused. Let
What's
me focus
wrong?
on
You're
one thing.
wrong.
Since you're not here to defend the entire Ontario
No,
Place
but
project, you're here
when
to
she
defend the
quotes
spa.
a number which is wrong,
I get you.
the
and
record
we-
should be corrected.
And
right?
we've spoken to that. What about Therme itself? There were some issues around the company itself.
Yes.
And whether it was a Canadian arm of an international company or whether it had some alter egos along the way that were problematic. We got a couple of minutes left here. Let's focus on that.
Well, I don't know much about the company. I do know what I've read in the Auditor General's report, and then the New York Times recently did an investigative piece about Therme. It was always a little bit unclear how many facilities they ran in Europe before they got the contract. It appears through the New York Times report that, you know, they really have only built and run one facility from its inception. You can tell me if that's incorrect. It does seem that they have partnerships with others in Europe. So, you know, there's a lot we don't know. We don't know where the financing is coming. We don't know where the decisions are made.
But you said you read the New York Times article.
Yes.
So at the end, it talks about AHEAT being an Austrian company. It talks about Macquarie Capital, which is one of the world's largest
I believe
infrastructure
it
investor.
said for the
You
Toronto
see
project, the
Sculptor
funding
Real
was
Estate.
not yet secure.
No, but the funding for Therme's operations globally, including in Canada, come from those sources identified at the end of the article. They raised the question at the start of the article. They answered at the end, but I guess you didn't get to that part
Excuse
of it.
me?
But the part that I think is most interesting here is that there are all these half-truths in that article that are easily explainable. Why the New York Times didn't do their fact-checking is beyond me. But I'll give you another
They
one.
stand by
They
the
raised
story.
they don't. But I'll give you one of the points that was most interesting was when they said that the facility we own and operate in Erding in Munich, just outside of Munich, and the one in Bucharest somehow share the same logo. We own both of them. That's why they share the same logo. It's a pretty easy answer to a pretty silly question. But more than that, when
Now
asked
you
about the
own
ones, well,
Right?
that's why they have the same logo now. But the issue of our capacity, we have built and we have designed and we have operated 6. The one family, which started the facility in Germany and has 5 other facilities across Europe, when the one family started to wind down their operation, we had already established from 2018 on a partnership, and we have absorbed most of their employees into our operations, and that is our capacity to operate. And that's why we've got facilities opening in Manchester, and Washington, and Dallas, and Toronto.
Hopefully.
Well, the building permits have gone in Manchester.
In other words,
fact,
Adam, this is a good company?
it's a good company.
This is a solid
building
company? We
permits-
don't need to worry
The New
about
York
it?
Times says we leveraged the Toronto bid to get financing for the Manchester bid. The construction documents, if you check the record, the construction documents for Manchester went in before our bid went in Ontario.
Yes, but you secured the financing after you got
Well,
the Toronto
you secure the financing, as any good developer will tell you, as the projects get realized. You don't secure the funding and then design the project. It's an iterative process, and we're meeting all the milestones, and we're proceeding with good intention. I just want to address the issue on the trees. She said mature trees, 800 mature trees. Of the trees that were taken down, only 229 would have been covered by the city's bylaws. That's according to the report that they quote chapter and verse when they do their assessment. The other 600 trees included the lollipop trees and concrete planters. They included weed trees. They included ornamental trees which weren't native to the area. So the notion that there was an old-growth forest there that was suddenly chopped down is absurd. The island is only 50 years old, and most of the trees were planted in the 80s. So yes, trees were lost, but they're going to be replanted at a 6-to-1 ratio, outpacing the city's requirements and adding to the 56 acres. And in 30 or 40 years' time, yes, some of those old trees, I can't put them back up. They were cleared as part of the site clearing exercise by the province, but our responsibility to re-landscape that entire 56-acre park and maintain it going forward, Therme pays for that. We don't get subsidized for
Ann
it.
Elisabeth.
I'm a little.
But those are the facts.
Sure. You also seem to play fast and loose with a lot of the numbers. So, like in the original application, we saw that the plan was to plant 700 trees to replace the ones that were taken down.
That's on the West
and
Island.
I think
it's
I'm a little
1,000.
confused because you, as the Therme spokesperson, are taking responsibility for the entire project, and I thought Therme was only dealing with the West Island. So when you talk about the 56
and the park
acres,
construction is a single set of parks. It's a single
And
park
so
with a single maintenance budget. So there isn't a sharp division of Therme on one side, Ontario Place, Park on the other side. There's a partnership there.
and in these other
so
spas that
it's why it blends.
Therme runs, are you also running public space? Are you also managing public space
that's the province.
for
The province
people?
insisted. The province insisted on a plan to integrate the two facilities, both the public park and the private facility, and then a plan to maintain it properly.
And do you also
As
have a
former city
plan
councillor,
for programming
the city
the
does
space?
not. We have an agreement. One of the things that you don't know about Therme, which I think is one of the best parts about Therme, is their incredible record of presenting and creating public art events. The largest theater festival in Europe is the Therme Project. There's an art festival in Berlin. There's the Serpentine Pavilion in London. There's Super Blue, an immersive art experience in Miami. So when the park is being built and when the park is being thought of, much like Trillium Park is now, the idea of programming arts events into the park, that's what that part of the lease that she says she hasn't seen speaks to. And that's what we plan to do on those sites, including working very closely with Indigenous partners to make sure that ceremonial space on the city's waterfront is finally an Indigenous space that they have a way of programming into.
Let me give you the last word here, and just by saying, are there any circumstances under which you could see your way to support some or any of what is going on down there? Or is it really beyond the pale?
I mean, I personally have things that I would agree to, but as a representative for a large group of people who have been following this closely, who have been really paying attention, our bigger concerns at this point are that Ontario Place is really being used as the canary in the coal mine on an assault on our democracy and a removal of the accountability mechanisms that we as citizens have for our shared assets, our shared resources. And so, as wonderful as Adam thinks this project is going to be, the fact is that it is tainted because it has been jammed through the public. It is being shoved down our throats with very little information.
Is that a Therme problem or a Doug Ford government problem?
It's a Doug Ford government problem, but in this case, Therme is really benefiting. They didn't have to conduct an environmental.
But that's like saying the Eaton Centre is benefiting from the Ontario line. I mean, at a certain point, give us our due. We're here to talk to you. We're here to build a great waterfront park. We'd like to make it better. We're happy to have the conversations.
I would love to have the conversation.
We'd love to have a frank conversation about what is or isn't a subsidy towards us, because, as you said today, most of that $2.2 billion from the Auditor General report has nothing to do with our company, so you can move off of that talking point.
Although
but at
the
the
very
end
low rent. It's
a $2 billion project, and there's substantial, revenue sharing clauses in it. There's a rent clause in it, and there's a maintenance clause in it, and we're only one tenant out of 5 different projects that are happening down at Ontario Place. They also are paying dollars into the kitty and also mitigating costs for taxpayers and also helping to deliver a great waterfront facility that knits into the golden and green waterfront that we all love in Toronto.
This might be a good spot for me to jump in and say, since you two have agreed to continue the conversation and listen to what each other has to say, maybe that's a good time for me to say, Ann Elisabeth Samson and Adam Vaughan, thank you for coming into TVO and having part of that conversation with us here tonight.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.